The mountain had taught Elijah Boone one simple truth over the years. Warmth was something you earned, never something you expected. And as the winter wind clawed at the log walls of his cabin that morning, he believed the same rule applied to marriage, which was why he stood stiff and silent near the doorway when the stagecoach finally appeared through the swirling snow, carrying the woman he had agreed to marry without love, without hope and without illusion. Elijah was a man carved by solitude, broad-shouldered, scarred, his beard flecked with early gray, despite his 36 years, living high in the Rockies, where silence was loud and loneliness was safer than loss. And when the preacher's letter suggested a mail-order bride, someone practical, someone willing, he agreed not out of longing but necessity, because winter was cruel, work was endless, and a man alone could only last so long before the mountain claimed him entirely. As the coach stopped and the door opened, Elijah expected exactly what he'd prepared for: a quiet woman with guarded eyes, a stranger who would endure him the way one endured cold stone, but what stepped down instead made his breath hitch in a way he did not understand, for the woman was smaller than he imagined, yet carried herself with a quiet strength, her coat worn but neatly mended, her dark hair pinned back against the wind, and when she looked up at the mountain, her eyes did not fill with fear but with awe, as if she saw not a prison but a challenge worth facing. She turned then and met Elijah's gaze, and instead of flinching at his size or the stern lines of his face, she offered him a gentle nod. Not a smile, not submission, just recognition, and something unsettled shifted in his chest, quickly buried beneath habit as he tipped his hat and spoke only her name. Clara, like a man testing unfamiliar ground. The journey to the cabin was silent, except for the crunch of snow beneath boots and hooves. Yet Clara did not complain, did not ask foolish questions, and when the cold cut through her gloves, she clenched her jaw and kept walking, earning Elijah's reluctant respect before she ever crossed his threshold. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of pine smoke and iron, simple and bare, and Elijah watched her take it in carefully, not with disappointment but with thoughtful consideration, as though already planning how to make it warmer, brighter, alive. And when he explained the rules, separate beds, shared work, no expectations, she listened without offense, replying only that she was not there for romance, but for partnership, a word that struck him harder than any demand ever could. Days passed in routine, Elijah chopping wood, trapping, hauling water, while Clara learned the rhythms without being asked, cooking with what little they had, mending torn coats, humming softly in the evenings, a sound so foreign to the cabin that Elijah found himself lingering near the door just to hear it, though he never said a word. She asked him once about the scars on his hands, not with pity but curiosity, and when he answered gruffly, she accepted it, neither pushing nor retreating. And that balance, her ability to stand beside him, without pressing into his guarded space, confused him more than rejection ever had. One night, a storm descended without warning, trapping them inside, the wind howling like a living thing. And when the roof creaked under the weight of snow, Clara moved instinctively to brace a beam, trusting Elijah without words. And in that moment he realized she did not see him as a brute or a savior, but as a man, flawed and capable, and the realization frightened him more than the storm. As weeks went on, warmth crept into the cabin, not from the fire but from small moments, shared glances over supper. Clara laughing softly when Elijah's old hound tried to steal bread, the way she left a cup of coffee warming by the stove before he returned from dawn chores, and though Elijah told himself this was temporary, that she would grow tired of the mountain and of him, he found himself waking at night, listening to her breathing in the other room, not out of duty but comfort, a dangerous thing for a man who had survived by expecting nothing. The mountain, however, is never content to let hearts change without a trial, and when Elijah failed to return one evening, caught in a whiteout that swallowed the trails whole, Clara did not wait helplessly by the fire, as he assumed she would. Instead, she wrapped herself in his spare coat, took a lantern, and stepped into the storm, calling his name with a steadiness that cut through the wind. And when he finally collapsed near the tree line, numb and disoriented, it was her voice that guided him home, her arms that held him upright, and her tears that fell not in fear but relief. As he lay fevered that night, drifting between waking and sleep, Elijah felt something he had not felt since boyhood, a hand resting gently on his brow, not out of obligation but care. And in that fragile space, between survival and surrender, the mountain man who had expected a cold marriage began to realize that the greatest danger was not losing her, but wanting her more than he knew how to protect. When Elijah finally woke, the storm had passed, but its echo lingered inside him, not in his bones, but in the quiet realization that Clara had crossed the mountain. For him, without hesitation, and as he lay staring at the low timber ceiling, the scent of pine and boiled herbs filling the air, he saw her seated nearby, eyes heavy with exhaustion yet steady. And in that moment something inside him cracked open, not loudly, not all at once, but enough to let warmth seep in where only cold resolve had lived before. He tried to speak but failed, and Clara noticed, rising instantly, her hand hovering near his shoulder as if unsure whether she was allowed such closeness. And when he finally whispered her name, the relief on her face was unmistakable, raw and unguarded. And it struck him then that she had been afraid, not of the mountain, not of hardship, but of losing him, a thought that unsettled him more deeply than any wound. Days passed as Elijah recovered, and for the first time in years he was forced to be still, to rely on another. And Clara moved through the cabin with quiet competence, tending the fire, changing his bandages, reading aloud from the one book she'd brought with her, never once reminding him of the risk she had taken, never demanding gratitude. And that restraint taught him more about strength than any winter ever had. When he was able to stand again, they spoke honestly for the first time, not about rules or survival, but about the lives they had lived before the mountain. Clara confessing that she had fled a future where she was expected to be small, obedient, unseen, and that she had chosen Elijah not because he was safe, but because his silence felt truthful, and Elijah admitting that he had agreed to marriage, believing love was a weakness he could no longer afford after burying everyone who had ever mattered to him. And as those words settled between them, something softened, something aligned, like two paths finally meeting after years of running parallel. Spring crept slowly into the mountains, melting snow, revealing hidden streams. And with it came change inside the cabin as well, laughter more frequent. Meals lingered over, shared work done side by side rather than apart, and yet fear lingered too, because Elijah knew happiness was fragile, and the mountain never gave without taking something in return. The test came sooner than expected when a letter arrived from town, informing Clara that her estranged family had discovered her whereabouts and demanded her return, promising comfort, security, and a life free from isolation. And Elijah watched her read it by the fire, her face unreadable, and though he said nothing, the old instinct rose inside him to step back, to prepare for loss before it could hollow him out. That night Clara did not sleep, and neither did Elijah, and when dawn broke, she stood by the door, coat in hand, and for one terrible moment he believed the mountain had claimed him after all. Not with snow or stone, but with silence. But instead of leaving, Clara turned and spoke with a firmness that surprised even her, saying she would not go unless he asked her to, that she had chosen this life, chosen him, and that she would stay only if he wanted her, not as a necessity, not as a helper, but as his wife in truth. The words lodged in Elijah's chest, heavy and terrifying, because wanting her meant risking everything he had built to protect himself. Yet as he looked at the woman who had walked into a blizzard for him, who had warmed his home and his heart without ever demanding entry, he understood that the cold he feared was not the mountains, but his own making. And so he crossed the room, slow and deliberate, and took her hands, rough and scarred against her, steady warmth, and told her that he did not know how to be gentle, that he would fail and retreat and grow silent, but that if she stayed, he would spend the rest of his life learning. And Clara smiled then, not softly, not politely, but with a joy that filled the cabin brighter than any fire, and the mountain seemed to exhale, as if even it had been waiting for that surrender. Their marriage did not become a fairy tale overnight, but it became real, built on shared mornings, hard seasons, arguments followed by understanding, and love earned daily through choice. And as years passed, travelers would speak of the mountain, man whose cabin glowed with warmth even in the deepest winter, of the woman who transformed solitude into home, and of a love forged not in comfort but courage, proving that sometimes the coldest expectations give way to the most enduring hearts.